Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Welcome back. I got it. Thanks. Welcome back to Saving Our Speech, Exploring the Laws of Lashon Hara. And today I have a very exciting topic. I think it's very exciting. And we're going to explore the theory of when you are allowed to share negative information about other people, when it is permissible, and maybe not only permissible, but a mitzvah. So I want to start off with the following actual question that was asked to a posek. And the question goes as follows. Say you are going shopping with a friend, okay? You're in the store. Let's say it's a clothing store. And you see that your friend is buying some sort of article of clothing. And you know that that article of clothing is overpriced. It is above, the price is above what it goes for on the market. And your friend is about to purchase this article of clothing for a price, let's say it's not exorbitant, it is not more than a sixth over what market value would charge. There's actually rules about this called Dine Ona'ah. The rule is if a seller charges over a sixth more than market value, the sale is null and void, and it's a prohibition. But let's say it's not like that. It's overpriced, but not out of question. So the question asked is, can you go to your friend and say, hey, you don't want to buy that here. I'm telling you, it's overpriced. Is it permissible to share such information with your friend if that would reflect negatively on the seller? And number one, it shows, hey, this guy is trying to run people through. He's trying to make a profit off of unknowledgeable customers. And even beyond that, you're going to cost him business. You're sharing information which is going to cost him a sale. Your friend was perfectly willing to buy the object, and now you're stopping him from doing so. So my question is that permissible, or would that fall under the prohibition of Lashon Hara? Andrew's here. Go for it. What do you think? Andrew thinks it depends. Good. Ralph, what do you think?
Is it permissible?
I'm asking if it's permissible.
It's certainly practiced.
People do it. Well, there's that.
People are always telling one another where to get the best bargain.
What do you think, Stephen?
Yeah, I agree with Ralph. I mean, it depends on the words you say. I mean, you could say something like, I saw this article for $19.99 down the street, period.
Right. So Stephen says, well, it depends how you say it. If you say it maybe in a negative, disparaging way, this guy, he's ripping you off. Maybe that's a problem. But if you just say, without saying anything negative about the seller per se, hey, you could get this for much less expensive down the block, maybe that's permissible. Okay, so that's a test case. There's another case which is kind of similar but a bit different, right? What if the owner of the store is not doing anything wrong? They're selling it for market value, but you know that someone down the block could sell it for even less than market value. You could get it for cheap down the block. Is that different? Is it the same? Andrew, what's your theory?
I'm wondering, what if the seller, for whatever reason, cannot get it for as little as the other seller, and for him, still the normal markup that the other
Right.
would have?
Well, okay, so Andrew says, well, maybe different sellers are able to get products for different values, and maybe one is selling it for this price because that's the best he can get it for.
But we don't know what the backstory is.
Right, Ralph?
And you're making judgments on the basis of your own.
Right. You're making judgments. So let me ask you, Andrew, do you think it's worse or better? Is it more likely to be permissible for you to share that information if the seller is doing their best, or less likely?
I think they're compromising the character of the seller then.
Right.
They're doing their best, because then someone may think that you're just being disparaging.
Right. Andrew says the guy's doing his best. He's not. I'm assuming that, by the way, the seller does not intend to rip over it. Sorry? That's fine. The seller is not intending to rip anybody off. It's simply the way the price that he shows. So to address this question, and I want to get back to it, don't worry. And there are many questions, but we're gonna learn a little bit today about the theory of what we call to'elet. So taking a step back, we discussed last week the theory behind the prohibition of lashon hara, and what we've essentially said is that there are two different perspectives which both might be simultaneously true. So one perspective is the problem with lashon hara is the damage it causes to your friend. Meaning you say something negative about your friend, it damages your reputation, which could cause all sorts of problems, a loss of money, a loss of relationships, and even worse. So that's one theory, that the problem with lashon hara is the damage it causes. The other theory is that it's less a focus on the damage per se. It's less a focus on the damage per se, and more a focus on the sort of character and behavior it demonstrates. Someone who speaks lashon hara has a horrific character flaw, or may have a horrific character flaw. They're malicious. They're intending to damage their friend. They're judging them in a negative way, which is also a problem. There are all sorts of character flaws exhibited by lashon hara, and the problem, therefore, is the character flaw. And these emphases might leave you in different places. So based on this, I'd like to now analyze this permissibility. There is a dispensation indeed, and the truth is, although everybody seems to agree to this, at least Rabbi Feldman in his book suggests the Chafetz Chaim in the 20th century was the first to codify this, but there is an agreed upon permissibility to share negative or what might be construed as negative information about another person if you're doing so for a positive purpose. If you're not doing so for a negative purpose, your intention is not to disparage them, your intention is not to speak maliciously, but rather for some positive purpose. And I want to sort of get at this from the first source on your source sheet, for those who have it. Again, I shared the link in the chat. And that comes from the prohibition, the pasuk, which dictates the prohibition against lashon hara. If you look at source number 1, it says, Lo teirech rachil be'amecha. That translation that you have in your source sheet is not a great translation. The best translation is probably do not go about as a bearer of gossip in your nation. This is the verse which serves as the prohibition for lashon hara. A rachil is a peddler of gossip. Don't go about spreading information about people in your nation, and certainly not negative information. That we spoke about last week. But look at the next phrase. Lo ta'amur al dam re'echa ani Hashem. Don't stand idly by the blood of your friend. I am God. What does that mean? Don't stand by the blood of your friend. How would one violate that prohibition? So the Rambam and many others say it's like this. If your friend is getting attacked, if your friend is being attacked by an ambusher or something like that, even if you were not actively involved in hurting them, you're not allowed to stand idly by and watch as they're getting attacked. That's prohibited. You can't watch them get attacked. You have an obligation, if you can, to save them. You have to step in. And by the way, this doesn't just apply to their body, but it applies to their money. If you see someone whose property is being vandalized and you can stop that from happening, you are obligated to interfere and to try and stop them. That's called lo samur al dam re'echa. Now I ask you, why is it that these two seemingly totally unrelated ideas, that of lashon hara and not standing idly by while your friend is attacked, why are they in the same pasuk? What do they have to do with each other? Are they just arbitrarily juxtaposed? So Or Chaim HaKadosh says no, and in fact, they're almost in sort of opposition. They're two different ideas which need to be balanced against one another. Meaning, one might think that since there's a prohibition of negative speech, if your friend's in danger, and you know about it, you can't tell them about it because that's negative speech. If you know, I don't know, Reuven is going to attack Shimon, if he's going to slander him, if he's looking to take something from him, whatever it is, and you tell Shimon, that's negative speech. Maybe that should be prohibited. It comes the Torah and says, as Or Chaim notes here, specifically that that's not true, that you are allowed to and are obligated. If you know Shimon is in danger because of Reuven, you're obligated to tell Shimon. You have to tell him. And don't say it's Lashon Hara. In such a case, it is not Lashon Hara. It is, and in fact, an obligation to share. You look here at the Or Chaim in source number 2, says Or Chaim, since it commanded against spreading gossip, you shouldn't stand idly by, it says, by the blood of your friend. If you see a group which is intending to slaughter him, you have to tell the guy so he can save himself. You can't. It's Lashon Hara. No, you have to tell him. If you stand idly by, you don't say anything to your friend, you violate this negative prohibition. And what's the classic example of this? The story we fast over, the story of Gedaliah ben Achikam. Right? Yonatan ben Kereach was going to kill Gedaliah ben Achikam. He was told about the plot to kill him, and what did he say? No, I don't believe you. It's not going to happen. Nothing. You never do such a thing. And indeed, it was true. And he got killed. And he was killed for not taking heed of this information.
We find the puzzle where we see Mordechai telling us.
Exactly. Albert makes a good point. Mordechai tells Esther of the plot to kill him. Lashon Hara, no. In fact, it's the opposite of Lashon Hara. It's a mitzvah. So the question then, well, it's obvious in cases of damage, in cases of harm, in cases where it's just you're saving somebody, then it's obvious that you have to tell them. And they don't say it's Lashon Hara. But there are obviously many other less clear, more foggy examples. And to understand the basic basis for them, I want to analyze why this is true. Why is it true? Why is it so that you are allowed to spread such information? Why do we say that if you're saving your friend, you can tell them this information? Why is that not a prohibition of Lashon Hara? What would you say? Why are you allowed to share such information? Why are you allowed to disparage somebody else but means saving the person they intend to attack? Very basic.
You don't want him to get killed.
You don't want him to get killed, but it's Lashon Hara. It's Lashon Hara. If they hear that he's a murderer, he'll never be able to get a shidduch, Albert. You know, I'm telling you, it ruins your shidduch prospect if you're about to kill people, if you're known to be an axe murderer. So the obvious answer is, I don't care. I don't care. Tough. There are some things that are more important than saving people's reputation. And if there's a victim and an attacker, the victim's livelihood or life or money is more important than the victim's reputation. So you're right. It's true. It is negative speech, but there are more important factors and more important considerations than negative speech. It overrides it. You could argue this way. Lo ta'amud al dam re'echa overrides the prohibition of Lashon Hara. There is another way of looking at this. And that is to say that it's just not negative speech. When we talk about negative speech, what do we mean? Focusing it on the English phrase, does negative speech mean speech that reflects negatively about the subject? Or does negative really refer to the attitude of the speaker? The attitude of the speaker is negative. But what if the attitude of the speaker is positive? I don't intend anything malicious about what I'm about to say. I just have somebody else's best interests in mind. I'm trying to save you. You know what? I'm not trying to disparage the other person. So you could argue, and let's relate it back to last week. If it is true that Lashon Hara is more fundamentally focused on character and not being malicious, then such speech which is pure in intent might simply not be Lashon Hara at all. It's just Lashon Hara. to say something about somebody else where your intent is not to disparage the person, but rather to save the person that you're talking to, is just not lashon hara, because it doesn't reflect bad character. You're not being malicious. You're not trying to save someone else. However, if you focus more on the damage can still be tremendous. If you say, hey, Mr. Jones is trying to swindle you, well, Mr. Jones might suffer tremendously from that. Even if your intent is pure. And yet, you might say, that's true, but tough on Mr. Jones. That's what happens. And considerations at stake. Okay, Stephen, what do you got for me? Stephen raised his hand.
Yeah. Oh, Ralph, I wonder if you could mute. I'm having a hard time hearing you.
No,
Thanks. Rabbi, how does this Lashon Hara relate to the story of the spies?
How does it relate to the story of the spies? It does, and on a simple level, they told Lashon Hara.
But how does that relate to what you just said? It depends upon intention.
You're asking a good question. It might have, if indeed well, I don't want to get into the whole story now, but on a very basic, God said it was a wonderful land, and that they should have had faith in God and in Hashem and helping them conquer Eretz Israel. And so for them to say it's an Eretz Ochelet Yoshveha is just negative. Now it's negative speech about a land, which is a topic for another time. Maybe actually for today, because it's a Yom HaAtzmaut tomorrow, and there is there is a problem against disparaging the land of Israel. But I think that would be Lashon Hara. Yes, good
But weren't
point.
the spies trying to protect the Israelites from getting massacred?
Wait, you're asking the question. Does depend on their motive. Maybe you could have argued if they indeed had pure motives, then it wouldn't be Lashon Hara. I don't think so. I don't think we assume that. I think we assume they did not have pure motives. And when God says it's a land filled with milk and honey, then you ought not say it's a land that eats its inhabitants. But that for another time. Okay. So now what I'd like to do is study with you briefly the words of the Chafetz Chaim. Okay. If you flip the page for a second, the Chafetz Chaim here, in a few places in his work, again, the Chafetz Chaim, known as the Chafetz Chaim, for his work about the laws of Lashon Hara. And here he enumerates the principles of what we call Lashon Hara Lito'eleh. Negative speech, which is for a positive purpose, which is intended to be helpful to someone else. And he has a number, first of all, he dictates what, the circumstance in which you would be allowed to share such information, but he also has a number of different conditions that you need to fulfill in order to share such speech. And I wanted to read through them and then think about them together with you. So here we go. Look at source Gimel over here. That's just the title of the topic. The topic says, in this section, we will explain various specifics in regard to negative speech, which relates to the realm of behavior between a man and their friend. If one person stole from his friend or extorted him and the like, if someone stole from you or extorted you, or physically or verbally abuse you, right? When are you allowed to tell people about it? That's the topic. Okay, so moving on. Source 4. By the way, before we go further, very curiously, we have two different types of sins, right? Really 3, but let's focus on 2. There's sins between a man and his fellow man, and there's sins between man and God. The Chafetz Chaim here is making a very clear distinction. He's saying, regarding sins between a man and God, a person ate not kosher, a person violated Shabbat, whatever that is, that we should assume you cannot share with someone else unless it's for a specific reason. But here he's almost assuming that you can share. If someone stole, if someone, abused someone, then you can share that information. Why should we assume that? Why is there a difference between Benam Lachaver and Benam Lamakom? Very basic. Whose business is it? We should assume, unless you were planning on helping the person do better, if someone sins between man and God, unless you can help them and stop them from sinning, And the only way to do that is by telling someone else. But other than that, it's not your business, really. But if someone hurts someone else, that is your business, because you have an obligation to help the person they're hurting. So that's why there's a clear distinction. So he says as follows. I'm going to read through it, and then I want to analyze it, and then we'll get back to our original question. If a person saw another person sin toward his friend, like he stole from him or extorted him or damaged him, whether whether the victim know about this or they don't know about it, or they embarrassed him, or they pained him, and they verbally abused him, and he knows clearly that the thief did not return the theft, and he didn't pay him back. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Even if he saw this alone, you are allowed to reveal such information to other people to help the victim who has been wronged, and also to denigrate such activity in public. You are allowed to tell people to discourage them from such behavior. Okay? However, if you're going to share such information, make sure you fulfill the following 7, or more than that, really, but the following prerequisites before doing so. Okay? Just before we look at these, we can already note that the Chafetz Chaim is being a bit tentative here, right? He says some very interesting things that you have to fulfill. So number one, it says the noda lo beveru, that you know for sure that it happened. It's not hearsay. You didn't hear about it, but you know that it happened. You know it, right? Number one. Number two, you also have to know that there was no restitution, that the thief didn't already ask for forgiveness and return what he stole. Now, I think the second one, it makes a lot of sense. The first one, I think you could already question a little bit. What if you were not 100% sure? Let's say you think Reuven is cheating Shimon, but you're not 100% sure about it. You have a strong suspicion. Are you allowed to share such information? From the Chafetz Chaim, it's not 100% clear that you are allowed to, although conceptually, I think we can agree that maybe you should be allowed to. Now let's go on to these, to the next page, page 3, and you can look at the conditions he enumerates. What I actually want to suggest is, if you could look at the English, if you're more comfortable, at all the different conditions, and let me know what stands out to you. These are the conditions the Chafetz Chaim says you need to meet in order to be able to share this sort of information, lit to'elet, for a positive purpose, right? So let's look at it briefly, and let me know if any of them stand out to you. Okay, keep going though. Don't. Okay, number one. We'll get to it though. Keep reading. Just take a minute. Okay. Keep looking for a second. So as you look at this, I'm just wondering the following question. Do you think these are reasonable or not? Not to say Lashon Hara about Chafetz Chaim himself, but do you think this is the sort of a description that, makes a lot of sense to always abide by, that you should never share negative information, let's say to save your friend from harm, unless you can meet all these conditions? Or would you argue that maybe even if you can't meet all of them, you still should be allowed to share such information? What do we think? Right? So let's just say them outside briefly. You have to see it yourself, and it can't be hearsay. You have to, even if you did see it yourself, you have to conclude that it is indeed theft, meaning sometimes we see something, we think it's theft, maybe it's not. So you have to conclude that what you think indeed happened did happen. You have to reprove, you have to give rebuke. Before going to someone else about it, you have to go to the guy who sinned and say, hey, you stole, give it back to him. Ask him for forgiveness, right? Also not so simple. You can't exaggerate it. If he stole a little bit, don't make up a whole story that you stole a lot. Okay, that's understandable. The next one, that when you're doing it internally, you have to think, why are you doing this? Only to help the person that's the victim and not for the purpose of disparaging the person who's the perpetrator, which is not so simple. Because, for instance, let's say Charlie is robbing, and you saw it. Charlie is robbing, I don't know, Sarah's fruit store. He does it every day. Let's say you hate Charlie. This guy is nasty to you. And now you discover that indeed he's also a thief. Well, on the one hand, you have a perfectly legitimate reason to share that information because Sarah's losing money. On the other hand, you have it in for Charlie. And you kind of enjoy the fact that he's about to get caught as a thief. What do we say about such information? So the Chavetz Chaim sounds like he's saying, maybe you can't say it because you have the wrong intention. Not so simple. Good. So what do we think about these? Reasonable or not? What do you think, Albert?
I don't know what to make of it, honestly.
It's too much. So what I would say is as follows. Going through these, some of these I think are very basic, meaning it seems obvious to me. Stephen will tell me what you think in a second. It seems very obvious to me that you shouldn't jump to conclusions.
Right.
And dan l'kavzchut, you should judge people favorably. You shouldn't just assume that they're doing the wrong thing unless you know they are. That seems reasonable. It seems very reasonable to me that you shouldn't exaggerate, which is something that we do. Sometimes we see something that's abnormal, and we have to keep in mind our own biases when we do such things. You might see somebody do something wrong, and then you might exaggerate it. Oh, he totally humiliated her, when all he did was, insult her. So you're not supposed to exaggerate. But it's hard to be accurate. Right. So
How do you know that he's honest? That's what it comes down to.
100%. 100%. So what many have said, and let me give you a contrast, okay? Rabbi Feldman, I didn't see the Chazon Ish inside. Rabbi Feldman, it quotes the Chazon Ish, another very important, it's on your source sheet, prominent, rabbinic figure. The Chazon Ish says there's one condition. One condition. You know what the condition is? Intent. Lashon hara l'to'ela means, why are you doing it? If you're doing it for a positive reason, to save someone money, or to whether it's to warn someone about a potential partner or prospective spouse, if it's for a positive reason, then by definition, he argues that that's okay.
Right.
Why? What do you think?
I think sometimes a positive remark is just as bad as a negative. In some cases, I'm saying, here's the situation. Oh, your friend or your brother, your sister, whatever, she's a tzaddik.
Okay, so that's called avak lashon hara, because then when you're inviting someone to say, no, she's not, she's awful. That's true. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying like this, okay? Let's say the case I'm saying. So, let's take the case I just said. Natan is stealing from Sarah's fruit store. You hate Natan. You hate his living guts. You can't stand the guy. But Sarah can't stand to lose fruit or money. That's not right. So should the fact that you have bad intentions in mind prevent you from saving Sarah from losing money? Might you be obligated to get someone else to do it? You know what? I hate Natan. But I need you to watch him because you're going to see he's a thief, and then you'll tell Sarah. Is that required? So let me just briefly summarize as follows. If you take the perspective that Lashon Hara is what we might call in halacha dechuya, pushed off, i.e., really even speech for a positive purpose, which disparages another person, is kind of Lashon Hara. But the point is that that concern is outweighed by the more important concern of saving somebody from being a victim or suffering a monetary loss or being attacked. You might say, okay, well, but that's true, but we really have to weigh the factors. It's not so simple. Essentially, if you can look at it as sort of a scale, that's one way of looking at it. Lashon hara, that's bad. But having somebody lose money or get attacked, that's really bad. So then you can understand, well, we have to start weighing different things. What if you're not sure? What if it's just a possibility? And you want to alert them, I think it could be that he's cheating you. So is a doubtful victim more important than sharing a certain amount of positive information, negative information? You know you're disparaging the guy. You're not sure he's doing anything wrong. It could be he's not, but you think he might be, right? So if it becomes a balancing act of we have to weigh the different factors, then you might be much more limited. And the Chafetz Chaim himself does see it that way. In a few places, he says the reason that you're allowed to share this information is because the concern of saving the victim outweighs the concern of disparaging the perpetrator. However, the Chafetz Chaim, the Chazon Ish, is of the opinion that that's not the case. That, and the Rav Hutner says this too, if your speech is for a positive purpose or for a helpful purpose to someone else, by definition, it doesn't fall under the umbrella of Lashon Hara at all. It's not Lashon Hara. It's because Lashon Hara is evil speech. This is not evil. You're doing it for a good reason. If you take that perspective, then you might be a lot more, your scope of what is considered to'eles might be a lot wider. And there are many poskim who say the Chafetz Chaim's guidelines here are ideal. They're things to shoot for, so that you should try to rebuke the person before you say something about them. You should try to get rid of any evil intent. And why? Because even if you're doing it for a positive purpose, but it's bad for you, right? The point is, if you hate the guy who did the bad thing, then you're allowing yourself a little bit to fall into that, path of hatred and disparaging someone, even if for a positive purpose. So all these are ideal. Try to do it only for positive purposes. Try to tell it exactly as it happened without exaggerating. You should try to, only do it if you're sure of it. Fine. But let's say you can't, maybe you still should share it. Maybe, you know what? I can't rebuke the guy. It's just impractical. I'm never going to come into contact with him. He'll never listen to me. I only just know that he's doing something, but I can't rebuke him. Or let's say I'm not 100% sure that this is actually happening. I didn't see it, but I have a legitimate reason to suspect that it's happening, and I want to tell somebody about it so that they can look out for it, right?
Tell the store owner that.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying. Go to the store owner, 100%. So there are those, and I think it's probably the best practice is that these are things to shoot for, these criteria. I don't think all of them, meaning that you're not jumping to conclusions is always good to do. Make sure that's the best of your capability, that you're not misconstruing anything, that you're not jumping to conclusions, that you're honestly analyzing and carefully analyzing the situation. But beyond that, all of these other ones, and you certainly should try not to exaggerate. But I don't know that if you can't fulfill every single other one of these criteria, that you absolutely cannot share the information. If, again, your primary motivation is for a positive benefit. So just to conclude for tonight, going back to our first case. The first case was, let's say you have someone in your store that is selling an item for not an exorbitant price, but higher than market value. And you have a friend that's going to buy it. Can you tell him, hey, you get it cheaper somewhere else? So indeed, I'm forgetting the name of the posek right now. I could look it up later. But the Avnei Yashbeh, Rabbi Feldman, I looked it up. He's a more contemporary posek. The Avnei Yashbe, I could look up his name. Just give me 1 second. Feel bad. I want to get his name. Here we go. Let me just look it up for a second. Avnei Yashbe. Here we go. I want to say the name. It's important to say the name of whom you're quoting. Avnei Yashbe. It's Rav Yisrael Pesach Feinhandler. Yisrael Feinhandler. So he answers this question, and what he says is, you are allowed to share that information. You are allowed to say you can get it for cheaper down the block. The Chafetz Chaim himself indicates he's not sure. Why? Because he says, look, it's not clear that the guy's doing anything wrong by selling it for such a price, because it's not so much more expensive. It's just more expensive. He might not be doing anything wrong, right? There's, again, in halacha, there's a certain limit, meaning at a certain price above market value, it's a prohibition. Beyond that limit, it's not necessarily a prohibition. So Chafetz Chaim says, hey, wait, let's weigh this. If you say the information, you're going to disparage the owner. You're going to cause some business. And he might not be doing anything wrong. So why do you have the right to save your friend? But he argues on that. He says that doesn't seem like it makes any sense, because the purpose of your speech there is positive. And in fact, he says it falls under what we started with. It falls under lo tamod adam re'echa. Lo tamod adam re'echa, what do you mean? What you mean is your friend's going to lose money unnecessarily by buying a product above market value that they could purchase elsewhere. And you have a responsibility to your friend to tell them, hey, don't spend that money on this. You could get it on market value anywhere else for cheaper. So you're saving them from damage, in a sense. What's even more interesting is he says, not just that. The Avnei Yashbe says, even if it's not a question of selling above market value, but the seller is selling it for market value, and you happen to know there's a store down the block where you can get it for cheaper than that, you're also allowed to share that information, because he sees that as doing chesed for your friend. And even that's permissible, and that's considered to'elet. So I think it's a good way of illustrating the issue, because the Chafetz Chaim's perspective would be, it's not worth it. It's not a fair trade-off. For you to say, hey, go over there and buy it for cheaper, you're helping him, but you're also hurting the other guy. And so you shouldn't do that. But for others would say, no, that's not Lashon Hara at all, because your intent is primarily positive. You're not trying to disparage anybody, even if it turns out that your speech ends up causing somebody one less sale. But since your intent is pure, then it's permissible. So I want to next week, hopefully, get to some more practical questions of this. Things like shidduchim and venting, things like that. Other applications of to'elet, but this to me is the two perspectives, namely either that to'elet isn't Lashon Hara at all, and again, most of this is from Rabbi Feldman. One argument is that it's not Lashon Hara at all, or that it is, but we have to weigh the damage of the victim versus the damage that you are inflicting upon the perpetrator, and the victim takes priority. Okay, we'll pause for now.
How much culture has to do with it. For example, I was brought up, probably does, never to tell on anybody.